To our first story here, and this is the Joe Biden interview with Jake Tapper. Now, I found this to be particularly interesting. Obviously, they are talking about Russia and Ukraine, and I think we need to listen to Joe Biden's response to this. And then I'm going to also talk about what are progressives in Congress asking Joe Biden to do now. So things have started to change and have started to shift. So let's go ahead and get into that.
You recently said that this is the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis that there's a legitimate possibility of someone using a nuclear weapon, which could lead to Armageddon. That's the word you used.
Just that thought right there, that this could lead to Armageddon. And Joe Biden looks a little bit uneasy here. Look at that. Look at his facial expression. You know, the fact that we don't have more people talking about this is very concerning. We do not need to have a nuclear war that could devastate the world, not just Russia and Ukraine, the entire world. And those who do survive, if there are people that do survive, what will be left for them? They won't be able to have food. They won't be able to grow food. And then there's also radiation. So the fact that this is even being discussed so casually, I want people to understand just how serious this could be if this were to happen. And the fact that Joe Biden even made that statement so casually, everyone should be concerned. He should be doing everything that he can right now to call for some type of peaceful resolution. And we've been saying that since day one. You need to call for peace. But here we are.
Realistic is it, do you think, that Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible of him to talk about it. The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations, who knows what would happen.
I actually don't remember him saying that. And if I'm wrong, if I'm incorrect in the chat, please let me know. But I don't remember him making that statement.
What is the red line for the United States and NATO? And have you directed the Pentagon and other agencies to game out what a response would be if he did use a tactical nuclear weapon, or if he bombed the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, or anything along those lines?
There's been discussions on that, but I'm not going to get into that. It would be irresponsible of me to talk about what we would or wouldn't do.
Have you asked?
There's been discussions of that, but I'm not going to get into that. You made a statement to the American people that we could be headed towards Armageddon, but you don't want to comment on if there would be a response from us or how we would respond. So you have all these people in a state of fear. Like, people are just freaked out. But you're like, I don't know if I want to comment on that. Okay.
Ask the Pentagon to game it out, though? I mean, just in case.
The Pentagon didn't have to be asked.
So French President Macron told me that he doesn't think that.
I want you to hear something that he just said right here, because this proves a point.
The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, or anything along those lines.
There's been discussions on that, but I'm not going to get into that. It would be irresponsible of me to talk about what we would or wouldn't do.
Have you asked the Pentagon to game it out, though? I mean, just in case.
The Pentagon didn't have to be asked.
This is another example where I talk about with foreign policy where the president of the United States can act alone. This is the one policy where he really doesn't have to get approval from Congress. Now, will they get approval from Congress in reference to spending money? Yes, that's why the billions and billions of dollars are going out of the door. Congress are the ones who are approving that. But when he wants to make a decision about foreign policy, how he would respond, he doesn't have to necessarily get the approval of Congress. And this is why it is incredibly important that if you are running for president of the United States, that you are very well versed in foreign policy. Now, some people disagree with me on this, but this is why I think having some type of military experience can actually help you if you're a presidential candidate. Some people disagree. Some people say, you don't need to have military experience. Okay, fine. But then you need to have some knowledge of foreign policy, because you can make a decision on your own which could be detrimental to Americans here in the United States and abroad. So when you have these candidates and they're making these statements, and it's very clear to me, no offense, but Marianne Williamson is very clear to me that they are not well versed in foreign policy, that's scary.
So French President Macron told me that he doesn't think that Putin is acting rationally. And he said that he thinks a lot of this is because of how isolated Putin was for 2 years during the pandemic. And others who have dealt with him, Condi Rice and Bob Gates and James Clapper, have used words like erratic and unhinged to describe Putin's behavior today. Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly. I think he thought, you may recall, I pointed out that they were going to invade, that all those 100,000 or more troops there, and no one believed that he was going to invade Ukraine. You listen to what he says. If you listen to the speech he made after, when that decision was being made, he talked about the whole idea of he was needed to be the leader of Russia that united all the Russian speakers. I mean, I just think it's irrational.
So if he's not rational.
So I'm a little bit confused, because he said a rational actor who miscalculated significantly, but now he just said he's irrational. So which is it? Aye.
And
no, I didn't say he's not rational.
You said the speech is what?
I think the speech is
okay.
His objectives were not. I think he thought, Jake. I think he thought he was going to be welcomed with open arms. That this has been the home of Mother Russia in Kyiv, and he was going to be welcomed. And I think he just totally miscalculated.
So you talked about this a few days ago, the search for an off-ramp for him, because his back is against the wall. There are questions about how rational he is. He already was a brutal dictator. What is the off-ramp? There's
questions about how rational Joe Biden is too. Who is running this country?
Is there any acceptable way that he can leave, in his mind, without seizing territory in a way that would not be acceptable to Ukraine?
I don't know what's in his mind, but clearly he could leave. He could just flat leave and still probably hold his position together in Russia.
And you really think that that's what's going to happen? Just leave? I don't see him leaving without some type of concession. I don't see him leaving without some type of territory going over towards Russia. I don't see that happening, and I could be wrong. But the fact that this has gone on for as long as it has, the fact that tensions have escalated, the fact that, and let's remember, there was a call for peace negotiation before it got to this point. At this point in time, I don't see him leaving without some type of concession for him. I think Joe Biden is being naive here. I really do.
The idea that he's been able to convince the significant Russian America of the Russian people that this is something that he thought made sense, but now he's accomplished what he wanted to do, and it's time to bring Russians home.
Would you be willing to meet with him at the G20?
Look, I have no intention of meeting with him, but for example, if he came to me at the G20 and said, I want to talk about the release of Griner, I'd meet with him. I mean, it would depend.
What? I have no intention of meeting with him, but if he came to me and said he wanted to talk about Griner, I'd meet with him. I have no intentions of meeting with him, but I would meet with him.
Depend, but I can't imagine. Look, we've taken a position. I just did a G7 meeting this morning. The idea, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I'm not about to, nor is anyone else prepared to negotiate with Russia about them staying in Ukraine, keeping any part of Ukraine, etc. So
then what are you going to negotiate? See, this is the problem. I really do not believe that he is going to leave without some type of concession, some type of territorial concession. So if you're not willing to even talk to him about that, what are you expecting to get out of this at this point?
it would depend on specifically what he wanted to talk about. But look, he's acted brutally. He's acted brutally. I think he's committed war crimes. So
that means a lot coming from Joe Biden. Coming from Joe Biden, he's going to call someone else out about war crimes. Okay.
So I don't see any rationale to meet with him now.
When people hear the word Armageddon,
Are you going to meet with him or are you not going to meet with him? He just went back and forth. Like Rick says, the man forgets what he said at the beginning of his sentences. Right. Like he just went back and forth like 3 different times. I'm not going to meet with them. I would meet with them. I'm not going to meet with them. Jake Tapper doesn't push back on that.
they get scared from used by a U.S. president. They get scared. Do you think in any way discussing this type of thing publicly, openly, Putin's possible use of nuclear weapons, might have the opposite effect of what you want? It might make some of our wobblier European allies be even more scared of confronting Putin.
Well, no, I don't think so at all. I think, look, it was a directed, when I'm talking about, I'm talking to Putin. He, in fact, cannot continue with impunity to talk about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon as if that's a rational thing to do. The mistakes get made, and the miscalculation could occur. No one can be sure what would happen, and it could end in Armageddon.
And you still are afraid of that, though, that it could?
Well, no, I don't think anyone, any rational person saying the initial use of of a nuclear weapon, killing thousands of people, does not have the prospect of leading to something that can be way out of control.
He's not afraid of that?
It could occur. No one can be sure what would happen, and it could end in Armageddon.
And you still are afraid of that, though, that it could?
Well, no, I don't think anyone.
He just said it could end in Armageddon. Jake Tapper is asking him, and you're still afraid of that? And he goes, well, no. What? After you got everyone afraid and everyone scared in this country after the tweet and the message that you put out saying we could be headed towards Armageddon, and now you say you're not afraid?
Any rational person saying the initial use of of a nuclear weapon, killing thousands of people, does not have the prospect of leading to something that can be way out of control.
Let's turn to Saudi Arabia. Some of your Democratic allies on Capitol Hill are afraid that the U.S. got played when you went to Saudi Arabia and fist bumped with the Crown Prince, because now, obviously, a few months later, Saudi-backed OPEC is slashing oil production in partnership with Russia. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Menendez, just called for a freeze on cooperation with Saudi Arabia, including most arms sales. Senator Durbin, the #2 Democrat in the Senate, says the Saudis sided with Russia against the United States. Do you think it's time for the U.S. to rethink its relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Yes. And by the way, let's get straight why I went. I didn't go to one about oil. I went about making sure that we made sure that we weren't going to walk away from the Middle East and what was going on. And by the way, today I just got off the telephone with the president I got off the phone with the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Lebanon. They've worked out a deal. They've been at war, declared war with one another for a long time.
That's not Saudi Arabia, though. I just want to point that out. He's talking specifically about Saudi Arabia. So this is a problem. I do want to correct something here. When he did go to Saudi Arabia, yes, he went there to talk about other things, but one of the conversations was about oil. I covered that story. Now he's trying to say he didn't talk to them about What is happening here? Do you see him falling apart right in front of our face? Jake Tapper didn't ask him anything about the U.S. relations with Lebanon. He specifically is asking him about Saudi Arabia. So to me, it doesn't matter that you made some type of agreement with Lebanon. What matters is, what are you going to do about the relationship with the U.S. and Saudi Arabia? Because let's be real, we got played.
We've worked out a boundary relationship along in the Eastern Mediterranean for oil. Then they're going to make an agreement that is historic. We also got overflights for Israeli planes over Saudi Arabia. We got movement in terms of how we would deal in the Middle East with aggression from Iran. But it wasn't, there were eight other parties there. It wasn't about oil.
Okay, but
But we should, and I am in the process when this House and Senate gets back. They're going to have to. There's going to be some consequences for what they've done with.
Really? Are there really going to be consequences this time? Because I've watched the United States make excuses for them every time. What about the journalist? What about the journalist? I mean, do we all remember the journalist who was killed? Were there any type of consequences for that? No. So am I really supposed to believe that there's going to be consequences this time around? I mean, what does it take?
Russia.
what kind of consequences? Menendez says suspend all arms sales. Is that something you'd consider?
I'm not going to get into what I'd consider and what I have in mind, but there will be consequences.
You can answer yes or no to that question, because the arms that Saudi Arabia is getting from the United States, they use to kill people in Yemen. Now, Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna have made statements saying that, look, we need to end this slaughter basically in Yemen. We need to make sure that this is rectified in some way, shape, or form. But here you have Joe Biden. See, this is why I say they're not on the same page. Then you have Joe Biden sitting right here. He won't even tell you whether or not we'll end arms sales to Saudi Arabia. What have they used those weapons on? What have they done with the weapons that they received from the United States? They've used it to basically commit a genocide in Yemen. And he can't say yes or no to that question. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do, but there will be consequences. Okay, we'll see.
Midterm elections are 4 weeks from today. The economy remains top of mind for voters. JP Morgan Chase CEO said the U.S. is likely to enter a recession in the next 9 months. Bank of America says the U.S. could start losing 175,000 jobs a month. Gas prices are on the rise again. Should the American people prepare for a recession?
No. Look, they've been saying this now. How every 6 months they say this. Every 6 months they look down the next 6 months and see what's going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. It hadn't. There's no guarantee that they're going to be. I don't think there will be a recession. If it is, it'll be a very slight recession. That is, we'll move down.
What the hell is a slight recession? That's like being kind of broke. It's like either you're broke or you're not broke. A slight recession. I've never heard that before in my life. He's not going to say it. I'll say it. Yes, you should be prepared for that. Because I've heard this multiple times throughout my adult life. Oh, no, we're not headed towards a recession. Boom, recession happens. What the hell is that? Wow.
Slightly. Well, look, think about what's happened. We have done more. We're in a better position than any other major country in the world, economically and politically. We still have real problems, but look what we got done. We passed so much legislation that significantly makes a point about, for example, the American Rescue Plan, the legislation to deal with inflation, the Inflation Act. We moved along. I mean, there's so much that's been accomplished that the idea.
So much that has been accomplished. He named two things.
that there's there's an automaticity to recession is just not there. They've been predicting this off and on for the last.
But you just said that a slight recession is possible.
So it is possible. Look, it's possible. I don't anticipate it. What I do think, look,
somebody, I don't know if people are able to tune into Richard Wolff's like streams or whatever. The next time you watch Richard Wolff, someone should put a comment under one of his videos and say, or if you're a Patreon of Richard Wolff, send him a message and ask him, Professor Wolff, is there such thing as a slight recession? I'm curious to hear what he would say.
Talk about the impact on families. The families they have reason to be concerned about energy prices. They have reason to be concerned about a whole range of issues. But look what we've done. We've been able to, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's more, look, I know I always quoted my dad, but my dad used to say,
Inflation Reduction Act, again, did not actually address inflation. Like, see, he can't think of anything else. That's why he keeps saying that one, because that was the one that was most recent, right? So that's going to be on your mind, right? And plus, the name sounds good. Inflation Reduction Act. That means we reduced inflation. But I told you guys, we went through that whole bill, and I told you this is not actually addressing inflation. That's why American people are still upset. And that's why, judging by the numbers, the poll numbers I've seen, that's why the Democrats are at risk of losing the House and possibly losing the Senate, because they're not actually helping the American people economically. They're coming up with these bills with these fancy titles that make it seem like they're doing something, but they're not actually doing what the title says that they are doing. But he can't name anything else. This is the second time that he said, look at all the things we've done. The Inflation Reduction Act, that's one.
what is there any breathing room for a middle-class family? And the breathing room is after all the bills are paid at the end of the month, they have anything left. And there's more than one way to bring down the monthly cost for people who in fact are struggling, to make sure they have the ends meet and they have enough money. And that's what we've done with the Inflation Reduction Act. Look, we've reduced drug prices. We've allowed, for the first time, we've been trying for years to get Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices. We pay the highest drug prices of any nation in the world. Mm-hmm.
You reduce prescription drug prices for people that are on Medicare, not for the rest of us. And everything else is still high. Grocery store prices are still expensive. Even the restaurants have increased their prices. Everything else is still high. So what just the what? Like, let's stop pretending like you did this for everyone. You didn't lower prescription drug prices for everyone. And the majority of Americans are not on Medicare. So who are you really helping? He's helping people that are over that certain age group, right? He's helping people who are part of the boomer generation, who are also the people who heavily come out and vote. Anybody catch that?
Major nation. They're going to be in a situation where no senior is going to have to pay more than $2,000 a year for the drugs, no matter how much they cost. We've reduced the price. They're going to make sure that nobody has to pay more than $35 a month for insulin, et cetera. So there's so much that we've done. And the same on energy. We passed look, what I ran on, I said we're going to deal with energy.
Right.
And the energy problem, we're going to deal with the whole notion of global warming. We passed $368 billion worth of help, which, as the same bankers talk about, is going to bring $1.7 billion off the sidelines in investment.
Which is nowhere near what we need to do for climate change. Nowhere near. It doesn't really matter that you passed energy legislation if you are still bombing countries. If the military industrial complex is still active and there's still war, that doesn't really help climate change. It's the largest single most polluter. So all these other things that people are doing, and we talked about this on the Activist Summit, solar panels, yes, those are good. Recycling, yes, that is also good. If you have an electric vehicle, yes, that also helps somewhat. But that being said, those things don't put anywhere near as much of a dent in reference to helping climate change if you still have an active MIC. That's the problem. And they're not going to disrupt that, because then that would disrupt their relationship for weapon contractors. Then they wouldn't be able to make any money for Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. You see the problem? Northrop Grumman. That's the problem. Then you wouldn't be able to try to be the leader of the world and police the world. Then you couldn't continue to steal resources from other countries and let the people live there in poverty. That's why they don't touch that. And the scientists will tell you that is what you really need to tackle. So all these other things that they're doing and people are telling you to do, that's cute, but that's not really going to help the problem.
Look what's happened. Look at the investment that's going on in America right now.
Yeah. So you think Democrats have something to run on?
Oh, I think we do. I know we do. And here's the contrast. We know what's the Republican platform to run on? What are they running on?
I'll tell you what they're running on. They are running against you and the things that you've done. They're running on the economy, which the economy is under Democrat control, right? So they can run on that. They're running on, well, in reference to the economy, they're running on like the prices, the inflation, they're running on that. That's the number one issue, not even abortion. And we've talked about this. We looked at the polls. Even abortion after the overturn is not the number one issue for Americans. The number one issue is the economy and inflation. And that's what they are going to run on. And that's why these races are as tight as they are. Didn't answer the question, by the way. Didn't answer the question. What are the Democrats running on besides the Republicans are going to get control and then they're going to turn it into a fascist country? It already is a fascist country, regardless if it's Dems or Republicans in office. This is why the polls are so tight, you guys. This is exactly why, because people see, okay, Joe Biden said he was running on the soul of the nation. We put a Democrat back in the White House, and economically things have gotten worse. And that's what they're going to run on. And then you have some of them who are running on, anti-war. Some of them are running on that.
They want to put Social Security on the chopping block every 5 years, and the other leader comes along and says, no, every year it should be up for grabs.
You also wanted to put Social Security on the chopping block. That video is still available on YouTube if people want to see it. You wanted to take down Social Security and Medicare, Joe Biden. Now, you may have changed your position on it now, but think how many Republicans that you had on your side when you made that speech in the Senate floor. All the Republicans that you had on your side, and you said you worked across the aisle and they agreed with you. So if you want to be upset that Republicans are thinking about taking away Social Security, I want you guys to remember it was Joe Biden who also wanted to take away Social Security along with those Republicans.
Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, these aren't negotiable items in terms of whether they're going to continue them or not. The first thing they said they're going to do is get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so what's that do? They're going to raise drug prices, raise medical costs again, be sure that we're going to no longer be able to have the ability to have tax credits for weatherizing your home, saving money. I mean, I don't know what they're for.
Our reporting, CNN's reporting and the Washington Post reporting suggests that prosecutors think they have enough to charge your son Hunter for tax crimes and a false statement about a gun purchase. Personally and politically, how do you react to that?
Well, first of all, I'm proud of my son. This is a kid who got, not a kid, he's a grown man. He got hooked on, like many families have had happen, hooked on drugs. He's overcome that. He's established a new life.
And he got the opportunity to overcome it and establish a new life. Your son didn't have to go to prison like everyone else that got caught. Your son didn't have to go to prison for 20 years like some of black men have had to because of your crime bill. How is that fair? They weren't given that opportunity. They weren't given a second chance to turn their life around. They were locked up. And some of them still there. And we've spoken to people. There's a gentleman on, he's on Twitter a lot, called Non-Voting Felon. I think he had to change his name. Anywho, he came on RBN last year. He was personally affected by Joe Biden's crime bill. Ruined people's lives. But because because who he is, because he's Joe Biden's son, he got off.
He is, I'm confident that what he says and does are consistent with what happens. For example, he wrote a book about his problems and was straightforward about it. I'm proud of him. He came along and said, by the way, this thing about a gun, I didn't know anything about it, but turns out that when he made my application to purchase a gun, what happened was I guess you get asked, you get asked the question, are you on drugs, you use drugs? He said no. And he wrote about saying no in his book. So I have great confidence in my son. I love him, and he's on a straight and narrow, and he has been for a couple of years now, and I'm just so proud of him.
You're about to turn 80 next month. Happy birthday ahead of time. Whenever anyone raises concerns about your age, you're the oldest president in the history of the United States, you always say, watch me. Voters have been watching you. Democratic voters approve of the job you're doing. Democratic voters overwhelmingly like you. But one poll shows that almost 2/3 of Democratic voters want a new nominee in 2024. And the top reason they gave was your age. So what's your message to Democrats who like you, who like what you've done, but are concerned about your age and the demands of the job?
Well,
they're saying his age, but that's a nicer way of saying his incompetence. That's a nicer way of putting it. People don't feel like he's competent to continue to do the job.
They're concerned about whether or not I can get anything done. Look what I've gotten done. Name me a president in recent history who's gotten as much done as I have in the first 2 years. Not a joke. You may not like what I got done, but the vast majority of the American people do like what I got done. And
what did you get done? If you did so much, people wouldn't still be in the economic, if Joe Biden did as much as he says that he's done, why are people still struggling? And don't come to me with the stimulus check, because some people didn't even get them, and he didn't even give you the whole $2,000 check. Some people will mention the child tax credit. They cut that short. So if he's done as much as he said that he has done, why are people still struggling? The $10,000 to $20,000 cancellation for student loan debt, that's peanuts. Peanuts. And they've made it difficult for people to apply for it. But not only that, there were all these other rules that they added along with it after it was announced. So certain people who didn't have their student loans consolidated apparently by a certain date didn't qualify for it. That was not mentioned when it was announced. These are things that came out after the fact. So you see the problem?
And so it's a matter of, can you do the job? And I believe I can do the job. I've been able to do the job. I've gotten more done. I got the Inflation Reduction. I got all these pieces of legislation passed. And I ran on that. I said this is what I was going to do. And I'm still getting it done. We've got, dealing with, making sure that veterans get compensated for the
burn pits.
The burn pits, making sure that we're in a situation where we finally have action on guns. And by the way, I'm going to get the assault weapons ban. Before this is over, I'm going to get that again. Not a joke. And watch. And so I just think
you didn't get past what was supposed to get passed. You were supposed to get past Build Back Better, which was already watered down, which we went over that bill as well. That's not what passed. And because of people like Joe Manchin, who's a part of your party, Joe Biden, the bill was drastically reduced. So this Inflation Reduction Act, notice that's the only thing he's mentioning. He said, look what I got passed, the Inflation Reduction Act. That's all he's mentioning.
You know, it's a matter of, has anybody done more in the first 2 years of their administration for a guy who was, they've been saying this about my age since I began to run. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, you can come work out with me in the morning.
Anytime.
FDR did more. Of course you'll go work out with them. What a joke. What a freaking joke. Now, something has changed. And I saw this earlier today. Now, some of the progressives are actually urging Joe Biden to rethink the Ukraine strategy. Let's go ahead and get into that story. This came out by the Washington Post, so take it with a grain of salt. We all know who owns the Washington Post. Liberals urge Biden to rethink Ukraine strategy. So here we go. Now, like I said, so there's Pamela Jayapal, there's Barbara Lee. You see what's happening, right? A group of 30 House liberals is urging President Biden to dramatically shift his strategy on the Ukraine war and pursue direct negotiations with Russia. My. Isn't that different from where we were just a couple of weeks ago? The first time prominent members of his own party have pushed him to change his approach to Ukraine. I'm going to go ahead and say this. I have no doubt that this is a result of the pressure that has come from the American people. Now, some people didn't like these protests that were happening where people were calling this out. Jose was one of the people. I showed one of the protests on here before where they were confronting AOC. Ayanna Pressley has been confronted. Jamal Bowman has been confronted. Basically, people that are reachable, because obviously these people cannot confront Joe Biden. And they're the ones that voted for it to send the weapons to Ukraine. But now the American people have sat back for months and we've watched you send billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, and people are still suffering right here. We watched you send billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine and you couldn't give us the full $2,000 stimulus check. What? We watched you send billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. And even when it came to prescription drug reduction, you only wanted to give it to people who had Medicare. So we've watched you give billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine, but you can't give everybody health care in this country. So people are not stupid. And people are seeing what is happening. So when you see these protesters confront congressmen and women about this, about voting for the spending, which has gotten ridiculous, by the way, they have every right to be there. Regardless what side they're on, they have every right to call that out. That is a problem when you have people still being evicted in mass numbers. That is a problem when people can't afford to buy groceries right now. That is a problem, and you have to call it out. And so I have no doubt. Notice this is coming out now after the pressure has come from the American people. You may not like Jose. You may not like what he stands for, but those call out videos went viral on Twitter. And even AOC drew more attention to it herself. Jamal Bowman drew more attention to it himself. This is why you have to have the pressure from the people. Now, is it just that made this happen? Probably not, but still. For the people who say these things don't work, you have to embarrass them. I'm sorry. It's gotten to this point because being nice to politicians has gotten us nowhere. We've been nice for years. Now it's at the point where you have to embarrass them. You have to call them out and let them know that the jig is up, that you know what's going on. Let me remind you, all of them in Congress, they have health care. So it goes on to say, the letter sent to the White House on Monday and first reported by the Washington Post could create more pressure on Biden as he tries to sustain domestic support for the war effort at a time when the region is heading into a potentially difficult winter and Republicans are threatening to cut aid to Ukraine if they retake Congress. You hear this? Republicans are threatening to cut aid to Ukraine if they retake Congress. The Democratic Party, you're supposed to be the party of anti-war. You're supposed to be the anti-war party. This is the problem. In a letter led by Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the 30 Democrats call on Biden to pair the unprecedented economic and military support to the United States is providing Ukraine with a proactive diplomatic push, redoubling efforts to seek a realistic framework for a ceasefire. So this is something that Rodrigo pointed out earlier in the chat. Notice now that the progressives are calling for, let's do a ceasefire, let's have peace. Notice now it's okay for some of the political pundits to also ask for the same thing. That's because some people take their talking points and their cues from Congress. If the progressives get behind it, then they get behind it. This is why something like force the vote was pretty embarrassing for some people, because the progressives wouldn't get behind it. They didn't show up. And notice ever since then, things have changed. Now, if the progressives are not behind it, some of these political pundits are not behind it because they don't want to be embarrassed again. You see how it works? So now more people are like, yeah, let's go ahead. Yeah, they need to call for peace. But where were all these peace people 3 months ago? Where were all these peace people 4 months ago, 2 months ago? Where were they? They were cheering on a win. They were cheering for a win from this result. They weren't asking for peace. The Democrats are specifically concerned that the United States is not engaging in regular dialogue with Russia as part of its effort to end a protracted war that has caused thousands of deaths and displaced 13 million people. The Biden administration has been adamant that it is up to Kyiv whether and when to negotiate with Russia, arguing that Ukrainians as a free people should decide their fate. But some Russian experts say Moscow will only negotiate with the United States, a fellow superpower. The lawmakers say that opening must be seized, giving the war spreading devastation. The alternative to diplomacy is protracted war, with both its attendant certainties and catastrophic and unknowable risk. The liberal Democrats note that the war's disastrous consequences are increasingly felt far beyond Ukraine, including elevated food and gas. I can't talk tonight. Elevated food and gas prices in the United States and spikes in the price of wheat, fertilizer, and fuel that have created global food shortages, not to mention the danger of a nuclear attack by Moscow, which is what some of us have been saying for months. For months. It's affecting everyone. So it's just, you have to call for some type of peace at this point in time. This is absolutely ridiculous. And the American people cannot continue to go through this. This is where we're at now. But notice now it's okay. Now it's okay to make this statement because Congress has made this statement. But a couple of months ago, when some people were calling for peace, it was not okay to talk about that. That's how it works.